are these people?
I wanted to talk about just the siege warfare and starvation Israel has, been using on the Palestinians as weapons for a long time now, not just recently, but we'll get into a bit. So I brought a couple of articles from the Electronic Intifada, this time by Nada Hamdouna on the 26th of March, in case people wanted to, know the dates and whatnot. But they write about cooking up steadfastness in Gaza. So they write, in Gaza, the struggle for food is more than about satiating hunger. It is a battle for human dignity. Israel has tightened its chokehold on Gaza crossings, preventing the entry of commercial goods and humanitarian aid. The renewed attacks, which have killed hundreds of people over the past week, signal a resumption of the war in which starvation was used as a deadly weapon. Not that the war ever really ended. The struggle to fill our bellies is one that families are still up against, with no reprieve during Ramadan, during which our fasts are traditionally broken by communal meals. So this is Ramdi Abdul. Check the date on that. October 25th, 2023. Right? So until now, Israel has bombed 10 bakeries in the Gaza Strip, and he lists all of them here. Right? And also continues, last night, the Israeli occupation planes bombed the only bakery in the Al-Maghasi area, which had been provided with flour hours earlier by UNRWA to supply tens of thousands of camp residents and those displaced there. The missiles completely destroyed the bakery and left a large hole in its place, in addition to demolishing a number of surrounding houses, killing 10 Palestinians and wounding others. And this is just in a long list of food-related bombings from Israel. They've bombed supermarkets with people in them. They've, I think it was you who brought them using flour as just traps, just leaving aid out to, essentially like salt lick an area, for lack of better terms. So, I mean, just incredible war crimes all around. But, I brought these. This is from the late Hassam Shabbat. Not even a drop of water has entered the besieged North Gaza since October 1st. The Israeli government is systematically using starvation as a tool of war. They want to starve the remaining population that wasn't killed by their bombs. The entire Gaza Strip is facing horrific conditions due to cold weather and heavy rainfall. 2 million people are experiencing bombardment, starvation, and displacement as the Israeli government uses collective punishment as a tool against the entire population. And we covered, what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the passing of journalists such as Hassam Shabbat. So please go check that out, just to remember them and honor them and do all that good stuff. But Vanessa Beeley, friend of the show, Israel is carrying out a policy of starvation and water deprivation in northern Gaza. According to Iyad al-Bassoum, a spokesperson for the Interior Ministry in Gaza, all bakeries in Gaza City and the northern towns are now officially out of service due to lack of fuel and flour. Again, this was November 7th, right? So we've had a long time since then of continued blockade, right? So this is the slow starvation of people reminiscent of, famine and, you can look back to Poland during the wars, all that stuff where this exact kind of stuff was happening. So, not great, but to continue, finding new ways to prepare family dishes with extremely limited ingredients is one means by which people are resisting. They improvise on recipes by using canned instead of fresh meats or onion and garlic powder when the vegetables, basic ingredients in our cuisine, are nowhere to be found. With sugar expensive and scarce, people turn to honey or date molasses received by some families in aid packages to create dishes that satisfy their bodies and ease their psychological pain. And that's when Israel isn't killing the aid when it comes. So that's also a thing, if we remember correctly, with UNRWA and what was the Jose Andres organization that was there? World Kitchen, something like that.
World Central Kitchen.
That's
World
it.
Central Kitchen.
So traditionally, staple food in our cuisine, fish has been extremely difficult to obtain because of the siege on Gaza's coastal waters that is enforced by lethal fire by the Israeli Navy. My father, who knows that it is my favorite food, looks for fish in the market but finds none. Food in Gaza is not merely sustenance, it is a symbol of steadfastness. The kitchen is not just a place for cooking, it is an open arena to protest the harshness imposed by Israel's genocide and severe restrictions which remain ongoing. So, yeah, any thoughts so far, Care Bear?
I mean, I feel like you talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah. I think it's one of the things that, like, right, like the entire time.
There's a genocide going on.
Yeah.
And, but the idea that people, well, one, I think you can see at both ends that obviously food is survival right now, but still it's the idea of like trying to find pleasure in the food, which you should be doing anyway. It's funny, like I had a conversation with one of my families whose child, I think she desires him to eat like different food. So she wanted him to have the school lunch.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, school lunch, I would argue, is not the place, especially in this country, to try and expand your culinary palate, so to speak. So I told her, you know, but it's obvious, but due to different things, he doesn't find lunchtime enjoyable. It stresses him out. And what I said to her was, food should be a time of it's pleasure. It should be pleasurable. You know, like you should be able to sit and enjoy and eat. But it's the experience of being with people that you care about or getting to know. So it's not just the food, it's the company, it's it's so more encompassing than just ramming food in our bodies quickly. And I think here, because we're just such a fast culture in America in general, we don't necessarily take the time to appreciate that. But even in Gaza, even in the midst of war, that they're still looking for ways that they can appreciate, you know, food, not just in terms of survival, but thinking about their families and what they like to eat and trying to accommodate that as best they can or finding an alternative. So just to care, even in the midst of pain, do they take when they cook, I think is amazing. But I think we should be more mindful of that too in our culture, even though we may not be going through all of that.
For sure. I think that's why I brought this, and stories like this I brought before. I think it's like one of those things that Americans easily relate to, right? Like, you know, it kind of is a window into cultures you don't normally get. So, and it's also people are very aware of their own food situations, which, you know, I think it's an easy way to like bridge a gap there. So they mentioned fish and stuff. Keep in mind, this area is literally like beaches and on the coast. So historic fishing communities all over that. But again, the late Hassam Shabbat, who filmed a young boy sitting on a piece of wood who spent hours rowing in the sea trying to catch fish amid the starvation affecting northern Gaza. So here's just a bit of what that would look like. You know, imagine children that age here doing anything like that, you know, for food, not just for like enjoyment, you know, like this is because they're hungry. So, so this is what, you know, getting food looks like there. So, you know, and I mean, this is why this journalist is no longer with us, because he puts out stuff like this. So Israel couldn't have anyone actually humanizing these people. So, yeah, I mean, pretty despicable stuff to me. So, and have you ever seen the Anthony Bourdains in Palestine when he was there?
Mm-hmm.
Those are important watches too. So I might go find that later for us. But he took a ton of not here. He took a ton of flack for that. So I figured I should mention it. And he felt like I just do what I always did and humanize the people in the region. So, let them tell their own story. But speaking of people in the region, we're going to bring Eva Karine Bartlett on the lesser discussed Israeli starvation and death policies Palestinians in Gaza have been suggested to for 15 years before October 7th, which I know that's more important. So she put this up in July with none other than Eve Engler. So 2 Indie Media Award honorees. So
whereas I'm glad the Lancet put this out, I know they have to be neutral in their wording or whatever, but I disagree that these are indirect deaths. Okay, indirect in the sense they aren't bombs, but Israel has, for when did the siege on Gaza, when was that imposed? 2006, I think, or maybe 2005. I think 2006. So since then, you and I know very well, and probably our listeners too, that Israel has done everything in its possibility and its might to make life unlivable in Gaza and to put Palestinians on a starvation diet. You remember that back in 2008 or 10, they literally said that, and they cut the amount of food aid, UN and other food aid that was allowed into Gaza by a third or half. That Amira Haas, the excellent Israeli journalist that writes at Haaretz, wrote about that back then. So my point that I want to make with the Lancet, not to denigrate them, but just to emphasize indirect in the sense these aren't Israeli bombs or snipings, but direct in the sense this is calculated by Israel. They had the intention to starve and create the conditions of disease and all these other preventable deaths, and they've succeeded in doing so. Perhaps lesser known to your average reader is the other policies of making it impossible for Palestinians to be self-sufficient. For example, farming or fishing, because the fishers are gunned down when they're a kilometer or 2 off the coast, whether they're on a hasaka, which is like whatever you call those paddle boards that you stand on, and they paddle out and they drop their nets and then pull the fish in later, or if they're actually in a fishing trawler, they're attacked by sniper fire, by shelling, by heavy-powered water cannon that's doused with a chemical that makes them smell like excrement if they're not, otherwise killed by shelling. They're abducted, their boats are stolen. All this stuff has taken away their sea source of food, and then the farmers undergo Israeli sniping on a daily basis just because they're on their land. And Israel says it's 300 meters on the Gaza side. It's all Palestine, but on the Gaza side between the fence and occupied Palestine. But in reality, in my experience, when I lived in Gaza and went with farmers, the Israeli army would fire 500, 600, 700, 800 meters from that fence. And it's a policy of targeted harassment to drive them off their land and to take away their food source, their agricultural basket. And then they also, of course, bulldoze the land, or if the Palestinian farmers manage to grow some crops, then they throw an incendiary device on the crops and burn them. So this kind of stuff's been going on since I was in Gaza, so 15 years plus. And they destroyed systematically the wells and cisterns, making it impossible to irrigate the land. So there's all these things that most people wouldn't know, which then sets up the base for all sorts of malnutrition, stunting in growth, anemia, all that stuff. The heavy dependence on UN food aid, which is really not very, it's pretty meager. It's not, it doesn't compare to the rich Palestinian diet that they previously had. And by rich, I don't mean luxurious. I mean the variety of foods they were able to grow, catch, or whatever, produce. Now all this diabetes, I'm not a doctor, but my understanding is a lot of it is due to these really drastically, before October 2023, these drastically limited diets that Palestinians exist on. And then the whole 95 or 97% undrinkable water situation, that's been going on since 2010.
97%.
I remember an article or a statement or something by the UN, I think it was 2012, where they said Gaza will be unlivable in 10 years. And at the time I wrote an article, or shortly after, saying it's already unlivable. So these are that's what I want to flesh out in my op-ed, because I think it's important people realize not only that, of course, as we always point out, this didn't start in October 2023, but also all these sadistic policies the destruction of the power plant, not allowing them to rebuild a proper one. So the chronic electricity crisis affecting the hospitals, the chronic crisis of inadequate supplies of medicines, emergency medicines, inadequate hospital supplies and equipment. All that's been going on for very, very long, like again, 15 plus years, 17 years, maybe. That's what I want to flesh out, because I really think people need to understand the indirect deaths are a direct policy from the Israelis top down.
Any questions? No.
Nope.
Shout out Eva Bartlett, friend of the show. Excellent work as always. When she was on, we talked about very similar things. Her times defending Palestinian farmers and the like, so so that they could harvest and actually make food for themselves to eat. So she mentioned this about them calorie counting Gazans, right? So Seattle Times paper shows Israeli counted calories to limit food in Gaza during the blockade. Al Jazeera, Israel set calorie limit. Right, here's the New York Times saying Israel applied an average daily requirement of 2,279 calories per person. Collin, you've been calorie counting. That's what? Below average generally? 3 is the average, right? I do believe. 3,000. I mean, it's like adequate generally, but depending.
For a man, sure.
Right.
For a man, it varies, but I would say on average about it depends on the person. Around 2,000, basically 2,000 is what you would burn
calorie
off.
Deficit. Yeah, it's 2,500
but 2,000 calories on average is what you would just burn off by existing.
Yes.
So it's not like you're just living. You will burn that off in a day.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're eating about that much a day, but then with the added stress that you're going through, you're at a constant
burning more
deficit.
Yeah.
More than probably necessary. So you're at a deficit due to the stress.
Plus, as we know, these calories are not good balanced macroed calories, right, because they're not getting the fresh foods and vegetables that they were growing.
Right.
So
honestly, I think that might be a little generous.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I think that number is a little inflated.
For sure.
Because it's just kind of looking we're not that bad. But yeah, I would argue that is probably way less than
what they even said. Sure.
More likely, sure. But but again, 2,000 is about what you just burn off anyway. So the idea that you're eating that at minimum,
and that's for median metabolism too. So
right,
right. There's plenty of people who would burn way more, per day. So, but
right.
Again, the late Hassam Shabbat, the starvation scenes in northern Gaza are very clear nowadays. As you walk around, you see children and women walking with pots, standing in long lines, hoping to find a meal for the day. The men usually risk their lives going to the fields to find produce or vegetables. When the first wave of famine happened, hundreds of men were killed in the fields while trying to pick food for their families. This is yet another layer of genocide, starving a population to break their will, eventually forcing them to leave and be ethnically cleansed. The Israeli occupation forces know exactly what they are doing. So, one of the greatest challenges faced by Palestinians living in Gaza is exorbitant cost of basic items. Cooking oil has become a luxury good, with families sometimes going months without being able to purchase any. A liter can cost $30 or more, depending on the status of Gaza's crossings and the prices demanded by exploitative traders, forcing people to use it sparingly. So, guess what a 48 fluid ounces of oil here costs, Care Bear? $3.97.
Right.
So that's a little over a liter. Like 10 ounces over. So keep that in mind just to get some perspective, you know. And if that's your oil, one of the most basic food, like, you know, staples, like you need it for everything practically, that's ridiculous. So when Ramadan began earlier this month, which was soon followed by Israel's total closure of the crossings, the price of cooking oil spiked once again, and fresh foods such as chicken and meat became prohibitively expensive or unavailable once more. This phase of struggle has been the hardest, with shortages of essentials and prices still sky high, no reconstruction, and our only option to get anywhere is on foot. And now that Israel collapsed the January ceasefire, which didn't last for a full 2 months, there is little relief to be found in Gaza when there is little to be found of much of anything. With meat and chicken currently unavailable, families are resorting to some of the approximations of familiar dishes that have characterized our cuisine during the war. One of these dishes involves chicken or beef mortadella, a processed food product more readily available than fresh meat, to prepare alternative recipes mimicking roasted chicken. Known as fake chicken, the dish is prepared by slicing the mortadella into long, thin slices. The strips are seasoned with chicken or shawarma spice blends, salt and black pepper. After that, we coat it with breadcrumbs and deep fry it in oil. I mean, this is just bologna. That's Italian bologna. Yeah. So nothing like a, you know, homogenized meat. So it's nice and emulsified, Collin, just the way nature intended. The technique is similar to how chicken breasts were commonly prepared before the war with the mortadella. The result is a dish resembling crispy chicken fingers. So I'm sure that's delicious when not, you know, made out of bologna, like breaded and fried. So anyway, people cook in clay ovens in a displacement camp in Khan Younis on the 31st of December. This is in the rain, outdoors on a homemade clay oven, right? So while you throw a Hot Pocket in the microwave, this is how people in Khan Younis have to cook. The resilience of the Palestinian people is unbreakable. So this is what we've seen since the beginning of this conflict. And mainly the women, by the way. I know the men are also having to go in the fields and dodge bullets, but we've seen hospitals being used because they're the only way to cook food, right? We've seen bread being made in like ORs, like ridiculous. So I got this reply on a tweet. We ask you as free Americans who reject genocide in Gaza to intensify your activity now. 2 million people in Gaza are dying of hunger because of the siege imposed on them by Israeli army. The bakeries that were helping by providing loaves of bread have all closed because of the depletion of all food supplies. The weapon of starvation is more severe, which is literally war crimes, by the way. This is siege warfare. So bread, essential to every meal in our cuisine, disappeared from our plates at a certain point during the war. Early on, Israel bombed Gaza's bakeries and deprived them of electricity, fuel, and flour, a recipe for famine. During the period of no bread and no flour, families who were able to buy the scarce quantities of pasta available on the market, like mine in northern Gaza, would grind the pasta and use the resulting pasta flour to bake bread. So, under famine conditions, the quality of the light but chewy pasta bread loaves, which was neither bad nor good in flavor, was irrelevant, given the lack of alternatives to alleviate our hunger. When some of the bakeries reopened around this time last year, bread became available in Gaza once again. But the bakeries were unable to meet the high demand. Some people were even crushed to death after being trampled in a crowd waiting for bread. With some families are able to buy bread, others make bread at home using flour and yeast and bake the loaves in a clay oven amid the lack of gas and electricity. I would also suggest finding some yeast in the air, building a mother, you know, a little sourdough starter, if I were you, would be a smart move, you know, and cherish it with everything. The firewood used to bake in clay ovens, like everything in Gaza, comes at a high price and therefore difficult to obtain. Some families pay a fee to use communal clay ovens to bake their bread. People are making do with whatever is available in the market. Rumania, a savory sauce in Gaza with a rich, tangy flavor, is traditionally made with fresh pomegranate. Because the fruit is difficult to obtain these days, some people have resorted to using jarred pomegranate sauce as a substitute. However, like many other food items, jarred pomegranate sauce is expensive, with 4 ounces costing about $15. But one jar can last for multiple meals and allow us to mark a special occasion and maintain variety in dishes while so many foods remain unavailable. The shortage of meat and poultry in Gaza has led many families to seek alternatives to ensure diverse meals. Among those alternatives, bulgur is an ideal choice. We prepare the chicken by soaking the bulgur in water until it becomes soft. Then we grind it, add spices, and a little bit of breadcrumbs. After that, we mix everything together and shape it into long fingers. We then dip it in flour and water, followed by more breadcrumbs. Finally, we cook the fingers in a deep fryer, giving it the crunchy outer texture and soft inside that is remnant of fried chicken. So,
vegan.
Yes, bulgur wheat. I'm sure that's actually tasty because fried food, you can't go wrong.
Or
really,
I guess more closer to falafel in a way.
Yes, that's what I would think. Right. And like, I'm surprised we're not hearing about that there frequently, because dried chickpeas, I guess they're also not being able to grow the chickpeas, probably.
Chickpeas.
So despite the harsh reality, go ahead.
Yeah, the land's toxic. So
yes,
that's safe
to
grow anything there.
Despite the harsh reality, people in Gaza insist that life must go on and that food must remain food regardless of the circumstances. So, yeah. So speaking of bread, right? This is, I brought this because how many of your elected officials have talked about how terrible a thing breadlines are in any capacity, right? Just super McCarthyite smears of breadlines. But meanwhile, in reality, we're causing that in Gaza. So this is by Donya Abu Sitta, right? She writes, I wake up early and I put on my clothes quietly. It's after dawn and the sky is tinted a soft orange. The sun is not yet fully ablaze and there is a cool breeze. I wonder if it will stay that way, and I hope it will, because waiting in the bread lines for an hour with the sun overhead gives me a headache. I put on my shoes and I hear my mother telling me to hurry up, that we have a long line awaiting us. The walk to Doha Bakery in Khan Younis takes about 10 minutes. Before the war, I would walk to university and sometimes near the sea, and I enjoyed these walks. But the walk to the bread line to join an immense crowd of people pleading for loaves of bread, that is not the same kind of walk. On the 2nd of March, prices skyrocketed in Gaza when Israel announced that it would close the crossings and stop the entry of all goods, including food, into Gaza. In the weeks that followed, many bakeries shuttered, hanging signs on their doors that read closed due to fuel shortage. The Doha Bakery, which is supported by the World Food Program, was one of the few that remained open. This means it's extra crowded and that we will wait for hours to get a single loaf of bread, which costs about $1. A worker came outside and pushed open the iron fence surrounding the bakery and announced, bread distribution will start at 11 a.m. It was around 10 a.m., still an hour to go. The bakery itself is a medium-sized building with a broken staircase leading to the entrance. Outside is a thumbing generator that keeps the place running. Inside are cracked machines. The building is full of bullet holes and the sun filters through them and the clouds of flour that surround the place. Children climbed onto the fence and peeked through the holes in the doors to watch the bakers prepare the bread. Time crawled slowly. Minutes felt like hours. The sun I had hoped to avoid had finally found us in line. I studied for an exam on my phone, but it was hard to concentrate with all the voices around me. In front of me was a woman in her 50s, with strands of white hair visible through her headscarf. Her hands had been blackened by fire smoke, likely from long hours spent cooking over a fire. She told me how her husband was martyred in December by an Israeli airstrike on Khan Younis. He'd been sitting with his friends when the house they were in was targeted. They told me your husband was martyred, but I didn't believe them, she said, but then my heart felt it, so I went to Nasser Hospital to ask about him. She said she saw him in the morgue and couldn't stop screaming. She said she yelled at him, "Why did you leave me alone?" She told me the story 3 more times before she got tired of waiting in the Breadline and left. Another woman was speaking to her mother. She said she was from Beit Hanun, near the boundary crossing there. They had been displaced from there to Khan Younis, then to Rafah, and back. Now we're staying in an UNRWA school because our home was demolished. One of my daughters attends school, another fetches water, and the third tidies up the classroom where we are staying. Each day they switch roles, and I come to the bakery trying to adapt to this harsh life. It was now 11 a.m. Time for distribution to begin. A worker let the first 10 women and the first 10 men into the bakery. A commotion arose and voices emerged from the crowd. "Can you give me bread? I need to leave to prepare food. I can't stand and wait any longer. I have a heart condition. I can't stand in line. I have a baby at home. I need to get back to him." More voices echoed the same desperate pleas, but the bakery won't fit more than 20 people inside. So the worker closed the gates again, and the waiting continued. After about 30 minutes, the same process repeats. Doors open, people plead for bread, doors close. The bakery doesn't close until 10 minutes before the Maghrib prayer call, around 5:50 p.m. that day. Our term came at around 2:30 p.m. Remember, they were there an hour early. As I received the bread from the baker, I felt nothing. Just the exhaustion of the 6.5 hours we spent waiting. My mother remarked that we were among the lucky few, not only to have bread, but also have it in time to prepare food before iftar, the meal which we break our fast for Ramadan. We left the bakery and the crowds didn't seem to be shrinking. I thanked God that we no longer had to wait. That day was my younger brother's birthday. We planned to make him pizza. We gathered all the ingredients, took the pizzas to the communal clay oven nearby, which costs about $1 for a few minutes. This way of cooking is much more affordable because we don't have gas to power our stove. The price of a few gallons of gas is around $50. We then started lighting the fire to prepare some tea. As the Maghrib prayer was called, we had our meal, and then I went to my computer to complete an exam, the one I had tried to study for online. I took my cup of sage tea, walked to my handmade wooden desk, opened my laptop, and started the exam. It was quite easy. I finished it within half an hour and scored 29 out of 30. I had another cup of tea, went straight to bed, ready to do it all again the next day. Thoughts, Care Bear?
I mean, people will wait in line for Beyonce tickets.
Yeah. Not there.
But no.
Even if things were right, they wouldn't be doing that.
No, you're buying basic need, buying bread, like all day. Which honestly, kind of, not to say it's like this, but it kind of gives like what I experienced when I lived in Africa, like just with more in the sense of the technology that we kind of take for granted, that we're able to do things here so much more faster. It's not necessarily a guarantee over there. And even if you do have it, you know, you may not have the electricity to power it. So, because electricity, you know, in Africa can be pretty fickle. So, you know, so having to do a lot of things by hand, or things taking much longer to do, and depending on what it is, it can take all day. So it's slower, but so add that, but add to the desperation people have in light of getting these things. And it's not, again, these are basic needs. It's not like
food, water, shelter.
like when I lived in Uganda, like taking all day to make a pizza because there isn't a Pizza Hut or Domino's, and I'm in the bush, so I have to make that mess from scratch. You know,
that was for Dutchies, right? Where it's like a big insulated bag, right? So you heat the Dutchie as hot as possible, right, with your food in it, and then you put it in the bag, right, and it like slow cooks in the bag, so that you don't have to use a ton of fuel. And it's literally like a whole charity sending those to like places in Africa, so that we're not using, like, women have to go get firewood all the time to cook constantly, and that would mean less.
Right.
So, but anyway, similar things would be useful here, I imagine. So, yeah, I mean, definitely a bit rough, especially here in the States, you know, and as tariffs are coming up, food is going to get more expensive here too. But over there, I mean, it's just been, I don't know how any of them are able to like get anything close to a diet able to sustain themselves. So that's, I heard somewhere somebody was talking about that, you know, this will have ramifications for decades, you know, just in health there and overall in the region, not going to be good. So, but anyway, talking about these stories is unfortunately why we're demonetized on YouTube. So if you would like to help us monetarily, you can scan that QR code or go to ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork. Link, as always, in the doobly-doo. But if you can't give, you know, you know what? Don't listen to just what signs have to tell you. Don't like, don't subscribe, don't share. All right? Don't let me tell you what to do either. Don't leave a comment. Jeez. Anyway, thanks for watching. Or not. No, dude, thanks for watching. We like it very much.